Have you ever been hungry? Do you get hungry about the time I stand up here knowing there are donuts across the way? How do we become hungry? Maybe like Pavlov's dogs, you hear a sound, a bell, and it makes your mouth start to water. You know that when I start doing the invitation, the decision time, you know donuts are just a couple minutes away. Sometimes just the sight or the smell of something can make me hungry. Even if I've just finished a good meal, you know, that dessert, when it comes out of the oven or you see it come out of the fridge or something, suddenly I have a lot more space. I can eat more. Skipping a meal or two can maybe make you feel hungry. Physical activity can make you feel hungry. Your body knows what it needs to sustain itself. The problem is that we've tricked ourselves over the years. We've made our bodies think that certain foods will satisfy that hunger. Foods that don't really satisfy, foods that don't really nourish us, but we think that that's what we need in that moment. Now, my body and I have this deal going. We've had it going for quite a while. When it's hungry, I feed it. When something looks or smells good, I feed it. When I'm bored, I feed it. But before we can fix our diet, we have to realize that we're not getting what we really need. We have to realize that we've slipped away from what really satisfies, from what really nourishes us. And at some point, since I've been standing up here, I switched from talking about food to talking about spiritual nourishment. We're going to look in Hosea chapter 4 today, and we're going to talk about being hungry. But first, let's pray, and then we'll read Hosea chapter 4 together. God, thank you for this passage. Thank you that we can come together and study your work each week and multiple times throughout the week. Be with us this morning especially, God, and bless our time together in Hosea 4. I thank you for the example that Hosea set and for his obedience to what you called him to. Be with us. Thank you for Jesus. Amen. Hosea chapter 4. Listen to the word of the Lord, O sons of Israel, for the Lord has a case against the inhabitants of the land. Because there is no faithfulness or kindness or knowledge of God in the land, there is swearing, deception, murder, stealing, and adultery. They employ violence so that bloodshed follows bloodshed. Therefore the land mourns, and everyone who lives in it languishes, along with the beasts of the field and the birds of the sky, and also the fish of the sea disappear. Yet let no one find fault, and let no offer reproof. For your people are like those who contend with the priest. So you will stumble by day, and the prophet also will stumble with you by night. And I will destroy your mother. My people are destroyed for lack of knowledge, because you have rejected knowledge. I also will reject you from being my priest. Since you have forgotten the law of your God, I also will forget your children. The more they multiplied, the more they sinned against me. I will change their glory into shame. They feed on the sin of my people and direct their desire toward their iniquity, and it will be like people, like priests. So I will punish them for their ways and repay them for their deeds. They will eat, but not have enough. They will play the harlot, but not increase, because they have stopped giving heed to the Lord. Harlotry, wine, and new wine take away the understanding. My people consult their wooden idol, and their diviner's wand informs them, for a spirit of harlotry has led them astray. And they have played the harlot, departing from God. They offer sacrifices on the tops of the mountains and burn incense on the hills, under oak, poplar, terebinth, because their shade is pleasant. Therefore, your daughters play the harlot, and your brides commit adultery. I will not punish your daughters when they play the harlot, or your brides when they commit adultery, for the men themselves go apart with harlots, and offer sacrifices with temple prostitutes. So the people without understanding are ruined. Though you, Israel, play the harlot, do not let Judah become guilty. Also, do not go to Gilgal or up to Bethaven and take the oath as the Lord lives. Since Israel is stubborn, like a stubborn heifer, can the Lord now pasture them like a lamb in a large field? Ephraim is joined to idols, let him alone. Their liquor is gone, they play the harlot continually. Their rulers dearly love shame. The wind wraps them in its wings, and they will be ashamed because of their sacrifices. The minor prophets, especially this story of Hosea's life, they're not the grim, frustrating, anger-inducing tales that we think as we first skim through their pages. Here, Israel was in trouble, and God called Hosea to bring this message, to give them this opportunity to return to him. They failed, and they were going to be punished, and they were going into captivity. God allowed them to have exactly what they asked for. Not what he wanted for them, but what they continually asked for and sought after. This story is about rescue. This story is about hope. Even these harsh words we see here as Hosea brings God's case against Israel, this is a story of restoration for God's people in a way that he knew that they needed, but in a way that he didn't want to have to resort to. He knew that they needed this captivity to allow them to have the things that they had asked for. But before we can get to that part, before we can see the rescue that happens, we have to understand where we are. We have to see that we are broken, that we are far from where God wants us, that even though we may feel like we're in his will, like our actions are justified, the way we behave is okay because we're no longer comparing ourselves to God, but against the people around us, we have to see that we're off base. We're living and acting out a tainted version of what God has called us to. We have to recognize the actual truth of the gospel, and we have to line that up with our own life as an individual and against us as a church, as South Lake Christian Church, and line that up against us as the church, as the worldwide collective of believers. And we have to see that before we can understand and truly accept that we are rescued. Before we can truly accept that reconciliation that's offered and take in what that really means to us. We really have to understand where we are. That is what God is trying to show us through Israel. That's what God's trying to show Israel through Hosea and his dramatic display. Drastic times call for drastic measures. These were drastic times in Israel's history. In verse 1, it says, there was no faithfulness or kindness or knowledge of God in the land. Can you imagine that? No faithfulness, no kindness, no knowledge of God in the whole land. If the virtues like that are missing, if the good is gone, what is there? In particular, if these virtues, if faithfulness, kindness, and knowledge of God, if these are gone, what fills that void? Well, Hosea goes on and tells us there is swearing, deception, murder, stealing, and adultery. It's interesting to look at this list that Hosea presents, and it's kind of paralleled in the Pentateuch, the books of law that Moses went up on the mountain to receive. Verse 3 starts with, therefore the land languishes, but those words carry a strong meaning. It's like the land is dried up, like there was a drought. The land where there is no faithfulness or kindness or knowledge of God, the land where there is swearing, deception, murder, stealing, and adultery, the land is hungry. The land is craving good because the bad that it's filled with does not satisfy. When you feed yourself junk for too long, your body begins to accept that junk. And before we can fix our diet, we have to realize that we're not getting what we really need. We have to realize that we've slipped away from what really satisfies, from what really nourishes us. We move on from this overarching warning to some more specific applications, and I want to read this again, verses 4 through 10, as Hosea goes on. Let no one find fault. Let none offer reproof. For your people are like those who contend with the priests. So you will stumble by day, and the prophet also will stumble with you by night, and I will destroy your mother. My people are destroyed for lack of knowledge. Because you have rejected knowledge, I also will reject you from being my priest. Since you have forgotten the law of your God, I will also forget your children. The more they multiplied, the more they sinned against me. I will change their glory into shame. They feed on the sin of my people and direct their desire toward their iniquity, and it will be like people, like priests. So I will punish them for their ways and repay them for their deeds. They will eat, but not have enough. They will play the harlot, but not increase, because they have stopped giving heed to the Lord. Hosea here is God's message through Hosea is directed first of all to the priests. The priests of Israel were in trouble. God took issue with them in particular because they know better. The words there again are a bit difficult to interpret there. I typically don't point to, I like the New American Standard. It's my phase of life right now. But I typically don't point to other translations. But the New Living Translation, I really like the way that this verse is said there. Don't point your finger at someone else and try to pass the blame. My complaint, you priests, is with you. They were supposed to be the leaders, bringing people closer to God. The priests were supposed to be helping the people understand God better, but they were putting themselves up front. They were putting themselves as the primary important person in the story. They were bringing other things into focus. They were putting people's attention onto them rather than pointing to God. They were causing division rather than unity. That's the problem that we hear about here. The issue that God takes with the priests through this message Hosea brings is the same issue that Jesus has with the Pharisees a few hundred years later. The Jewish leaders of his day, they were more worried about maintaining control and keeping things the way that they wanted them, the way that they liked them. And we see this in churches across our nation today. They took God's word and they twisted it. Although it's in black and white, they twisted it to mean what they wanted it to mean, to maintain their eliteness. Verse 6, we read, "My people are destroyed for lack of knowledge, because you, priests, have rejected knowledge. I will also reject you from being my priest." Now, this is to the priests, but I want to bring this as a word of caution to us all. This idea, this warning that Hosea brings, this is absolutely for me as a leader in the church. This is absolutely for our elders as leaders in the church. James 3:1 says, "Let not many of you become teachers, my brethren, knowing that as such we will incur a stricter judgment." This warning is for leadership, for teachers, for elders, for preachers, but this is also for each one of us. You have a responsibility. First of all, to yourself. You can't lead someone to God if that's not the direction you're headed. Second of all, to your family, to your spouse, your kids, your close friends, the people you spend the most time with. How can you lead a stranger to understand God? How can you lead an acquaintance even to understand God with passion and sincerity if that's not what you're doing with the people closest to you? Now, don't confuse this. You can't make them accept Christ. You can't make people pursue Jesus. It has to be their choice because that's how God set this up. We see a pretty clear example here in what Hosea has to do for God's people. God can't make them follow him. He had to do something to get Israel's attention. God so badly wanted them to look back at him and to realize what they'd done and to come back. But it had to be their choice. Third of all, it's a big world out there. Do your part, whatever your part is, whatever your responsibility is, and I promise you, your responsibility in sharing Christ with the world entails more than showing up at church on Sunday morning and sitting down for an hour. The issue is that although we know we have this responsibility, we find ourselves hungry. When you feed yourself junk food for too long, your body begins to accept that junk. Before you can fix your diet, you have to realize that you aren't getting what you really need. We have to realize that we've slipped away from what really satisfies. We've moved away from what really nourishes us. Now, this warning for the leaders, and I laid that on all of us, it's not just for those leaders. We all have some sort of leadership capacity. You are all leaders in the church in some form. But also, Hosea's example, Hosea's warning is, in addition to leadership, this is for us as a group. I want to look again at verse 11 through 14. Harlotry, wine, and new wine take away the understanding. My people consult their wooden idol, and their diviner's wand informs them, for a spirit of harlotry has led them astray, and they have played the harlot, departing from their God. They offer sacrifices on the tops of the mountains and burn incense on the hills under oak, poplar, and terebinth, because their shade is pleasant. Therefore your daughters play the harlot, and your brides commit adultery. I will not punish your daughters when they play the harlot, or your brides when they commit adultery, for the men themselves go apart with harlots and offer sacrifices with temple prostitutes. So the people, without understanding, are ruined. Now, some of this seems harsh and out of place to us today, but in their culture, that was what surrounded them. They were just seeping into the nations and the people around them and doing what everyone else was doing. It seems so harsh. We can't believe these kind of lifestyles unless we stop and look around. We can see our Christians, our believers, our people who sit next to us on Sundays becoming more and more like the world. Sure, the Israelites were off base. They had swerved away from the truth and what God had called them to. And they turned toward what they desired in that moment, and God gave them what they asked for. He allowed them to have what they wanted, even though it wasn't his desire for them. Even though it was bad for them, it was their choice, and the people followed the bad example. The people were asking little statues for advice. They began to accept everything around them. They began watering down God's word, and they began to apply only the bits and pieces that worked out for them that day, the bits and pieces that were convenient, trying to live off the little Debbie snacks and the potato chips. They began to welcome whoever and whatever into their faith. Whatever would make them happy, whatever would feel good in that moment, Do you understand what God is trying to get through to Israel, through to us with this example of Hosea, with his life? Do you understand the truth of what God is trying to convey with the illustration that Hosea lived out? Think about Hosea's life. Think about what the people around him saw. You are God's, but who or what else are you giving yourself to? We see Hosea's example as kind of extreme because we don't want to look at our own lives that closely. When the people of Israel, who were only following their leaders, lived these lives that were not the lives that reflected their position, which they so boasted of as being God's people, their children began to follow their example, and generation after generation, they slipped farther and farther. As a church, our children are following our example. These little compromises we make, they can cause major issues. These little twists, these little things we leave out here and there, these words that we cling to in order to maintain control and live our pleasures and our passions. What happened to Israel, and it pulled them away from God. The end of verse 14 says, the people without understanding are ruined. This warning is absolutely for the leadership of Israel in Hosea's time and for leadership in our churches today, and not just this church, but all the churches. The warning is for each one of us. We're living 2,000 years after Jesus, and this book is what we have to help us understand what he did. This book is what we have to help us understand God, to understand his will for us, to understand how it is that we are supposed to fellowship, how we're supposed to worship. This book is how we understand how we're supposed to live. It's up to me. It's up to our elders. It's up to the teachers, and it is up to you. But you are not without understanding. Our issue is that we are hungry. If you feed yourself junk food for too long, your body begins to accept that junk food. If you feed yourself the junk of the world for too long, your life starts to reflect that junk. But before we can fix our diets, we have to realize that we're not getting what we really need. We have to realize that we've slipped away from what really satisfies, what really nourishes us. It seems pretty clear that God is more than a bit disgusted with Israel at this point. This is kind of their last straw before God lets them go into captivity. They kind of lock themselves in chains and walk right into it. He's disgusted with their choices, disgusted with how they're living. And we'll talk about Israel here because it's easier for us to talk about how disgusted God is with them than it is for us to look at our own lives and see how disgusted God is with us. He offered them freedom. God allows Israel to be taken over, to be held captive. But he offered them freedom. He offered them this call to return to him. He offered them the good life, and they rejected him. Let's take a look one more time at the last part of the chapter, 15 through 19. Though you, Israel, play the harlot, do not let Judah become guilty. Also, do not go to Gilgal or up to Bethaven and take the oath, as the Lord lives. Since Israel is stubborn like a stubborn heifer, can the Lord now pasture them like a lamb in a large field? Ephraim is joined to idols, let him alone. Their liquor is gone. They play the harlot continually. Their rulers dearly love shame. The wind wraps them in its wings, and they will be ashamed because of their sacrifices. We see what happened to Israel. We see the captivity, but now looking at our own life, at our own existence as the church, we see what happens next. Only our stakes are a little bit higher than Israel. They went into captivity, and then Jesus came, literally. Our stakes are high. Our stakes are eternity. He offers us freedom. He offers us the good life, maybe not right now, but eternally. If you want to live your life for you, that's your choice. You get to make that decision, and you get to live with the decision you make. But don't you dare put out a false truth. Don't twist the gospel because it's what makes you feel good. Kids are watching. Whether kids to you are 60, 40, 20, 10, 2, the kids are watching to see how we live out the truth. The disciples came to Jesus and asked him who the greatest in the kingdom of heaven is. Now understand that they were missing the point of everything Jesus was doing at this point. The goal is not to be better than that guy. The goal is to be like Jesus. But what Jesus says to them in Matthew 18:6, whoever causes one of these little ones who believe in me to stumble, it would be better for him to have a heavy millstone hung around his neck and be drowned in the depth of the sea. That's pretty serious, right? You get to choose how you live. You get to choose what you put into your body as truth. You get to choose how you nourish yourself spiritually. But don't let others see your bad mistakes. Realize that you are being watched. When you feed yourself junk for too long, you begin to accept that junk. When you accept the junk of the world for too long, you begin to live that junk. And before you can fix your life, you have to realize that you aren't putting into you spiritually what you need. You have to realize how far you've slipped from what God has called you to, from what really satisfies, from what really nourishes you. Have you ever been hungry? How do we become hungry? Sometimes just the sight or smell of something makes us forget what we were doing, and we get focused on that. Skipping a meal or two can cause us to feel hungry. There are donuts in the cafe, so we can stop talking about food now and talk spiritually. What are you doing to nourish yourself spiritually? What in the world that you see looks like it might satisfy you in that moment? How have you let yourself believe the lies that say anything but God can satisfy you? How many spiritual meals have you skipped or left sitting on the plate because you get distracted by something else? Are you spiritually hungry? Are you starving? It's a time in our service where we have to make a decision. And we all make a decision every Sunday. My prayer is that you won't decide to continue starving yourself spiritually. My prayer is that you will pursue God, that you'll understand what it means to feed yourself proper nourishment spiritually, and you'll make changes in your life. Maybe today you need to make a decision to grab someone around you during our closing song, and you need to say a prayer and have them pray for you. And that's a good decision to make today, to be encouraged by your church family. Maybe you've never accepted what Christ did for you. Maybe you've never accepted that when Jesus died on that cross and got up again 3 days later, that was for you. Today is a good day to make the decision to accept that, to repent of whatever life you've lived, and to be obedient to Him and follow Him in baptism and in pursuing what He has for you, in pursuing His nourishment, to stop being hungry. And maybe you're doing well. Maybe you've got a pretty good diet going. You read your Bible, you pray, you go visit your friends and talk about Jesus and Bible study together, but you need some accountability from a church family. And today is a good decision to make, a good day to make that decision, to call this your church family, be accountable to us so we can be accountable to you, so together we can be the best men and women of God we can be. Together we can be the best church here in South Lake County that we can be. We all have a decision to make. What decision will you make today? Let's pray. God, thank you so much for today. Thank you for reminding us. Thank you for allowing us to see in the Scriptures things that can help us, things that happened hundreds of years ago that can help us today, God, to better see you, better understand you. God, help us to see our hunger. Help us to understand how to properly nourish ourselves, God, and help us to be an encouragement to one another as we see each other eating Little Debbie cakes and potato chips, that we can point each other out to more, better, solid nourishment in your word. Thank you so much for Jesus, and it's in His name I pray.